Hey everybody, it's EJ from Eyedesyn.com, and today we're going to create some fun Mylar balloons in Cinema 4D using Cloth and Vertex Maps. Let's learn how. Alright, so here are our little Mylar balloons. You're going to be making some balloons today, and it's a fairly straightforward process, and I'm just going to take you through all of the things to kind of understand about how I created these and how you can go off and make your own nice little balloons. So let's start a whole new scene, and the technique that I used is by using an extrude object. So whatever you want to turn into a balloon, so if we want to make a circular balloon, what we're going to do is we're going to create a circle spline, and then what we're going to do is extrude that circle spline by placing the circle underneath the extrude. And we want to make the extrude object fairly thick. And the next thing I want to do is for this to turn into like a nice smooth piece of geometry, we need to go into our garage shading, and you're going to see that we have no subdivisions on the front or the back of our extrude. So to be able to introduce some geometry, because what we're going to ultimately be doing is kind of deforming this and kind of shrink wrapping, sucking the edges of this object and creating those nice little seams on the edges to create our little Mylar balloon. We need enough geometry so that when the deformation happens, it's nice and smooth. So there's three important steps to be able to prepare this extrude for use with this Mylar balloon technique. The first being on the circle spline, we want to change the intermediate points from adaptive to subdivided. And the reason for that is we can actually control the subdivision by length. So you can see that as I bring this down, there's a subdivision every 54 centimeters. If I bring this way down, there will be a subdivision every 4 centimeters. So the reason for this is we have nice even subdivisions across our object. So you can make it as dense as you want. I'm actually going to cover how this Mylar balloon workflow affects different types of meshes, whether it's dense or it's light. So important thing to remember, we chose 8 as the maximum length here. So what we need to do to create geometry that matches the side geometry as far as subdivisions is by going in the extrude object's cap. And the first thing we need to do is, just so this is treated as an entire fused object, meaning the caps are fused with the extrude edge here, we need to turn on create single object. Now if you have an older version of Cinema 4D that does not have this, and I believe this was introduced in R16, you simply have to go up and grab a connect object and just throw your connect object, throw your extrude object under your connect object, kind of the same thing. But with R16 and above, this is our kind of like baked in connect object. Alright, so to get the subdivisions on the front cap and the back cap here, we need to change the type of cap subdivision from n-gons to quadrangles. And then what we need to do is check on this regular grid, and what you're going to notice is that now we have this really nice grid subdivision on our caps, so front and back caps, and we can actually have it try to match the subdivision or the maximum length subdivision on our circle object, which is 8 centimeters, by just placing 8 in the width. And you can see that it kind of tries to match up to the subdivision on the extrusion sides here. So now we have our nice subdivision here, and what I'm actually going to do, I'm just going to call this circle balloon, and what I'm going to do is duplicate this and hide it because I want to demonstrate something later. And since we have this set up already, I don't want to have to redo this all over again. So just making a backup. So what I want to do now is make this editable by hitting the C key. So C makes that editable. It creates the turns the extrude object into just polygons. And then what I'm going to do is the technique I'm going to use is actually using the cloth module, or the cloth engine. So I'm going to apply a cloth tag onto my circle balloon object. And the only tab we really need to worry about is this dresser. Now, what we're going to use is actually something that's typically used for like characters, clothes and stuff like that. And basically it melds the front and the back of a piece of geometry using a seam, and then kind of stitches those sides together. So our seam is going to be this extrude bit. So I'm going to go ahead and select them all by choosing U, and then our shortcut key for loop selection is L. So U, L. And now I can, since I'm in polygon mode, I can just select those side polygons here. And then what I'm going to do is say set seam poly. So these are going to be the seams of our balloon. And once you set that, the only thing you need to do next, and this is actually kind of fun. I love doing this every time, and it's called a very fun name. It's called the Dress-O-Matic. And let me just press the button, and you can see what it does for yourself. So I'm going to hit the button, and you're going to see that it just sucks in everything. It's almost like it vacuum seals those edges together. And you can see we have this really nice kind of Mylar balloon edge, or almost like a throw pillow or something like that. But in our case, we're going to try to tweak this so we can actually get a really nice balloon looking effect. So we've got these really nice creases and stuff like that. And there's two settings in the Dress-O-Matic. And the nice thing about this is we can actually tweak these settings and then just hit Dress-O-Matic again, and we'll actually redo that Dress-O-Matic simulation. I feel like I have to say that every single time. So what we're going to do is just go over these two options. So steps is basically how many steps the simulation keeps going. So if I illustrate this by putting a step of just 1, you're going to see that when I hit Dress-O-Matic, nothing happens really because we don't have enough steps. When I do 5 and hit it, you can see that we have the simulation, we have the Dress-O-Matic thing happening, but the deformation isn't as pronounced because it hasn't fully like stitched those seams together because it's only 5 steps. So it's kind of like running a simulation over a number of frames. If you just run a simulation over 5 frames, you won't see much of a difference versus like if you run a dynamic simulation or a cloth body simulation over 30 frames, because there's a lot more space and time for that simulation to take effect. So you can see that I can keep playing around with this, and if I crank this up very high, you can see that the simulation runs for a very long time. We have way more deformation. So this is great for clothy kind of things, but that's way too many steps for just a tight Mylar balloon that we want. So we only need a little bit of simulation for that to happen. You're going to notice that our seam here is fairly wide, and that seam is controlled by this width. So if I change this width to 30 and hit the Dress-O-Matic, you're going to see that stitched together our seam gap is 30 centimeters wide. So for something like this, we'll probably want to do something very low for a seam, so something like 2. You can see that's a really nice seam. Let's try 4. And again, the nice thing about this is you can keep messing around with these settings and just keep hitting that Dress-O-Matic button and just kind of see what happens, see what looks good, and I think that's looking pretty good. Now, what I want to do now is save this cloth simulation, or save this little Dress-O-Matic simulation. So what I'm going to do is to kind of store that, I'm going to say set initial state, and then what I can do is actually just delete that cloth tag because we don't need it anymore. We got the nice simulation we want, and there's our nice balloon geometry, and you can see that it's kind of chunky at this point, but what we can do to smooth everything out is just place that under a subdivision surface. Now we got nice smooth edges. You can see we got this really nice folds and creases along the edge here. And again, if we didn't have our original balloon, let me just turn on this. What's going on here? There we go. If I just turn on this circle, you can see what happened. Number one, our object kind of shrunk, and had the seams stitched together. So you can see that a lot of this is dependent on how big your object is and how much depth there is on your extrude. If the extrude was very small, it wouldn't look like this is kind of filled up with air. So you need to have enough depth so it doesn't look like a flat whoopee cushion or something like that, right? So what I want to do is demonstrate the difference between a highly subdivided surface and then running that Dress-O-Matic cloth simulation and the high. So this is like our high subdivision. You can see how dense that mesh is, even if I turn off the subdivision surface. What I'm going to do is just show you the difference between highly subdivided and maybe less subdivided. So to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and increase the width on my quadrangle caps on my extrude object, and then again, let's just do 20. So I like nice even numbers. And then remember, we need to match that number in this maximum length. So from 8 to 20, and you can see how much bigger our little polygons are. And then what we can do is, let me just duplicate this, turn this off, and then again, just make this editable. See, to hit it, make it editable. And now we can go ahead. This is like basically the workflow is just go to your cloth tag. We need to select our seams, so UL loop selection, and then we're going to go and set the seam polys. And you can see that we have all these little yellow X's, so we know that's working. And then the Dress-O-Matic, and then you can see. Let me just bring down the seam width there. You can see the difference between a higher subdivided balloon and a lower subdivided. If I place this more less dense mesh in a subdivision surface, and actually let me go ahead and just set initial state. So sometime when you mess around with stuff, it'll actually reset the cloth simulation. So I'm going to set initial state. Let me just delete that tag because I don't need it anymore. And basically, when I turn off the lines, you can see the difference between highly subdivided getting more of these nice little seams and less subdivided getting less of these seams and way more bigger distortions. So just kind of keep that in mind when messing around with creating your own balloons. That subdivision matters, right? All right, so let me just go ahead and delete that ugly balloon. I like this one much better. And let's just go ahead and keep tweaking this. What I want to do first is, since I have my little seam selected already, I'm just going to make those little like edge flaps on balloons. We have those little seam edges. So what I'm going to do is extrude a little bit. And what I'm going to do that is hit the M key to bring up our modeling shortcut tools. And then T is our extrude. So I'll hit T, and then I'll just extrude this out a little bit. And you're going to see that some of these edges are kind of going different ways. So what I'm going to do is up this maximum angle here. And you can kind of see what's going on. We got this nice little flap. And let me undo that. Let's just see what a bevel does. So I'm going to hit M, and then our bevel shortcut is S. And let's see how that looks. Doesn't look all that good, actually. If I just create up this max angle here. So you can see the stuff's kind of folding weird. Let's see how this looks from far away. Actually, that doesn't look too bad. You can see what I'm going for as far as that seam. And let's actually just adjust this offset just a little bit. Extrusion out a little bit more. We just want a slight thing we can just barely notice, and I think that looks pretty good. Maybe an offset or a extrusion of 3.5. Cool. I think I'm digging that. So that looks good. We just created our little seam guy here by using by doing a bevel on those selected edges. And now let's texture this guy. So I'm just going to double click in our material manager here, and for a nice like Mylar balloon texture, I'm basically going to go into this color channel and just turn it off. And what I'm going to do, let's first apply this material to our object. And what I'm going to do is just add a Beckman reflection. And you can see that if I render this, you're not going to see anything because I need something in the scene to reflect it. And what I'm going to do for that is just use the Grayscale Gorilla HDRI Studio. I'm just going to add that to my scene. So that's going to load up an HDRI. And I'm just going to go to the floor controls and just say turn off floor, turn off background. And let's just go and open this browser and choose some kind of interesting environment here. So I'll choose this convention center window, HDRI, and let's hit render. And you can see we got some really nice reflections going on in our Mylar balloon. So again, reflections and HDRs make this Mylar balloon texture really sing. So let's just go into interactive render region here so I can mess around with this and you guys can see exactly what's happening. So the thing with reflection of super highly reflective surfaces is we need to introduce color in the reflection with this layer color. So if I want a blue balloon, I'm just going to go in here and choose like this teal, and you can see that tints our balloon blue. And I can really crank up this color and you can really get a sense of what's going on there. We can add maybe a little bit of roughness there too, so it's a little bit blurred, something like that. And if we want maybe a darker blue here, maybe do something like that. You don't want too much bright color because it's really hard to get that kind of really super bright reflection in reality. So let's just mess around with the brightness here. Another thing I like to do is go and just turn on global illumination and change our renderer from standard to physical, so we have more physically accurate rendering and reflections. And what I'm going to do just for the sake of this tutorial is we got these handy defaults in our global illumination. I'm just going to go to interior preview and just turn off our secondary method to none. So really what I'm just doing is just making this GI calculation, this global illumination calculation, as quick as it possibly can be. And let's just maybe brighten this up by upping the gamma, so the gamma kind of brightens up our global illumination. And that's looking pretty good. I'm digging that. We got a really nice reflection. What I'm going to do is go and just bring this reflection layer below, go to my default specular, and what I want to do for this is just create like a wide specular, something like this. I'm going to go Fong so it's a little bit sharper, then just bring this down, and what I can do is introduce some of that blue hue into our specular. So it's just a little bit of a difference. Just a little bit, because Mylar balloons do have a little bit of specular action going on. We could probably see this a lot better if I just add like an area light into the scene. And let's just go like this. Bring it up here, so we got a nice, like, kind of a specular happening there. Let's go ahead, turn on some fall off. Boop. And just getting this texture nice and lit. Cool. So let me actually make sure. Yeah, we got it additive, so we have our specular added on top of our reflection. And looking nice. Maybe brighten this up a little bit. All right, cool. So you can see just how just a little bit of roughness kind of helps a lot. And I can actually go in the HDRI Studio rig here and just blur out that reflect texture. And you can see that makes a huge difference as well. The one thing I've noticed with my Mylar balloons is that it's kind of hard to pick up colors from the reflected environment in them. So for any HDR that you're using, I would just bring down that saturation. So if you're using an image or something like that, you might want to mess around with the saturation on that image and maybe even the contrast to get more deeper blacks and more brighter bits like that. So maybe just a little bit of contrast there. So I think that's looking good. The only thing I see on this Mylar balloon to up the sexiness of this Mylar balloon is getting those nice little small creases on the edges of our object. And this is actually fairly easy to do. What we're going to be doing is using Vertex Maps. Now, Vertex Maps are basically like an alpha, like painting an alpha channel or something, basically painting polygons that you can use as a selection. And the nice thing about Vertex Maps is you can actually smooth out polygon selections. So again, I have selected the little seam bits here that I beveled. And what I'm going to do is actually grow that selection. And again, I'm going to bring up my handy dandy shortcut key, which is U. And you can see all the way at the bottom, Y for grow selection. And what that's going to do, so if I hit Y, that's going to grow the selection and select the polygons that are perpendicular or connected to it. So I can do that again, U, Y. You can see I grew the selection again to the surrounding polygons of that initial selection. And let's just do that one more time because those are the, I'll undo that. Let's just start with this. So let's go ahead and I have these selected. And what I want to do is create a vertex map out of that selection. So to do that, go to the select menu and we're going to say set vertex weight. And for this, it's set to 0. And what I want to do is say set this to 100%. So this is a full blown 100% selection. And I'll just hit OK. And let me just turn off the garage shade or the lines here so you can see what happened. So this selection, all these polygons I selected have turned yellow. Yellow means this is selected. Everything in red means that if you apply any kind of effect to it, it will not be affected. Only everything in yellow can be affected. And you can see that we have this nice little gradient of this blurring between these two, which is really nice because for the effect that I'm going to want, I want to have some wrinkles kind of start from this edge and then kind of taper off and fade away. So basically I want to do a noise texture, apply a noise texture, and control exactly where that noise is. So what I can do to kind of blur this out, which is really nice, I'm first going to turn off my subdivision surface here. I'm going to double click on my weight tag here. You can see that my vertex map got created once I set that vertex weight. So I can double click on this little tag here and it's going to bring up some options. And this is basically being able to control our vertex map. And you can see as I hover over, it's actually giving me a paintbrush. So I can actually add to my selection and paint on there, which I'm just going to undo that for now. But what I want to do is smooth out this gradation. You can see it's kind of choppy, right? So we can just change the mode from add, which is adding to our vertex map selection, and we can just do smooth. And then I can just apply all. I don't want to apply selected, but apply all, and I'm just going to smooth everything out. And you can see that that's smoothing a little bit every time because the strength's only at 25%. But you can see that just blurred out our selection a little bit more. And let's just do that a few more times. And I think that's looking good. So now we can actually use this vertex map to control some noise that is introduced onto our texture. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go into my Mylar balloon texture. And in the bump channel, I'm going to create some noise. So let's go ahead and create some noise. Bring the noise. And we're just going to bring the global scale down. We're going to up the relative scale on the Y so it's a nice long, kind of looks like wrinkles. And for the noise type, let's just do dense. And you can see as I render that, let me actually just, wait. Looks really ugly right now, but we're still tweaking. Let me just turn off global illumination just so we can render faster. And I'll turn on interactive render region here. What I want to do is change the space of the noise from texture to UV 2D. And what that's going to do is apply the noise on a different basis. It's not going to rely on the actual texture. It's going to rely on the UVs in 2D space, which is nice because it's a little bit more predictable. And then what I'm going to do is just bring the global scale down a little bit so you can kind of see what's happening here. We're getting some nice wrinkles, but again, it's all over our object. And number two, it's facing the wrong direction. It's going down. We actually want all of our wrinkles to be going in Z direction along our seam. So what we need to do, we need to go to our texture tag. Let's select our object, select the texture tag, and we need to actually change the projection from UVW mapping to spherical. We're going to choose spherical, and you're going to see some weird stuff happen. And what we need to do so we can actually adjust this material as we would adjust a object in our scene, like hitting R and rotating and stuff like that. I want to do the same thing with this texture and how it's mapped spherically. And to do that, I just need to go up to my texture mode, and you can see we have a sphere represented in our scene. And what I want to do is move this and scale it, but you can see that when I'm trying to move this, it's actually not moving. That axis is not moving. To actually adjust the axis of a material, we need to go and enable axis modification. And now we can go and adjust this. So you can see that as I bring this sphere more to the center of my object, and you can kind of see what's happening there. I can scale this up. I can scale it vertically, horizontally, and the Z, which is really nice. I'm going to do that. But what I can do is actually rotate this by hitting R, and that'll bring up the rotation bands. And what I'm going to do is rotate it 90 degrees, and you can see what happened there. Now our wrinkles are kind of coming from the edges and trying to go in the inside there. So it's almost like it's pulling the outsides inward. This is exactly what we want. But again, we don't want these wrinkles emanating all the way to the center of our object, right? The nice thing about being in this texture mode is we can adjust the scale and stuff like this and rotate so we can actually be precise where our wrinkles are with our noise and all that good stuff. So what I want to do is actually get out of the axis mode. I'm kind of done with that, so I'll go back into the object mode so I can move my objects instead of my textures. But now what I want to do is actually isolate that noise, this really nice noise we have, and just isolate it to our selection that we made here, our vertex map, and use this vertex map as like a mask. So we can do that really easily. Let me just turn on interactive region there. So I'm going to go into my bump channel, and I got my noise here, but what I need to do is actually throw this noise into a layer. So I'm going to go and grab a layer shader, and then what that's going to allow us to do is work like we would in Photoshop when we actually stack layers of other effects onto the noise. And the effect that I want to add is, and it's actually cut off. Let me actually bring this up. Go to Effect, or Shader, Effect, Vertex Map. So I'm going to bring that in, and you're going to see that just blows out the noise because it's underneath. So what I'm going to do is, and if I go into my vertex map here, let's just go back in here. So if I go to vertex map, click this square, I can load up a vertex map. So all I need to do is drag and drop this vertex map into the vertex map field, go back into my, let's just go back up into my layer, go into the layer shader, And to use this vertex map selection as a mask to mask out the noise, I first need to actually place it below the noise layer. And then I need to change the blending mode of this layer to layer mask. And then what you're going to see is very subtle wrinkles happening on the side here. And what that tells me is I need to grow my layer selection or my vertex map. As you can see with the bump off, you can see something's happening. You can see a little bit of distortion there, but just not a ton. So let's go ahead. Let's shrink the noise a little bit. The noise might be a little too fat. And then what I want to do is actually grow this vertex map because it's not emanating far enough to see enough of those wrinkles. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and apply selected. I'm going to bring 100% strength. I'm just going to add to that selection. Let's go to our polygon mode. So we can see all our polygons selected here. And let's actually grow this selection even more. So again, we're going to use the modeling shortcut of U, Y, and we just grew our polygon selection to one level thicker. And now what we can do is double click our vertex map, go apply selected, and what that's going to do is apply full strength that vertex map to another layer of polygons. And then we can go ahead and smooth that out again. So I'm just going to do apply all, smooth that out. And now let's see, let's just check to make sure, since our vertex map's already in here, it's going to actually update with all those changes. And now let's actually see if we can see more of our wrinkles. I think what our problem may be is our wrinkles are a little bit too thick. So we can barely make them out in this here. So you can see how big our wrinkles are. So let's go back into our texture mode, go into our axis, and what we're going to do is just kind of shrink. Actually, let's grow this up a little bit. And let's actually go into our texture tag here and adjust the length in U. And you can see that's making smaller little bands there, smaller noise streaks. So let's make it a little bit smaller. So now let's see how that looks. Now you're making out a little bit more. You're seeing a little bit more of those streaks. Let's go ahead and bump up the strength so we can really tell how this vertex map is working. So you can see that's actually looking really nice. I cranked up the noise or the strength of the bump, and you can see that really nice bumpiness from our noise is isolated and masked out by our vertex map. So super, super handy. The cool thing about vertex maps, let me just go back into my object mode here and go into my vertex map and double click. Again, it's going to bring up my paintbrush. The cool thing we can do now is we can, let's just make sure, let's check off visible only, because what I want to do is paint this and then also paint on the back side, have that paint go through. So I'm going to uncheck visible only. And what I'm going to do is go back into my options. I'm going to go to add, and then just let's just get a strength of 20. We can actually paint on here and kind of adjust where maybe we want to see more of those longer streaks on these selected bits here. So it's a little bit more organic and has a little bit more variation. So now what we can do is once we add it onto that, we can now smooth this out. We might have I might have went a little bit too out of control here with this. I might have to erase some of this because I think this area down here is going to have too much noise. But you can see as I smooth this out, I'm kind of making this look a little bit more organic. And what I can do is actually erase and add more of that red back in. So just nice little paint. Do your Bob Ross impression with your vertex map painting. Happy vertex maps. And we can just smooth that out again. something like that. So it's not so uniform. And we can even use a smooth tool on just certain areas here to smooth out some of this stuff. So let's see what that looks like. You can see certain parts. You can see a lot more of our wrinkles here, and that's looking really, really nice. Looking way more nice than it was before. And again, we can actually erase a little bit more. Something like that. So I really want to just tell the difference between where we have more smoothing and where we don't. So you can see more of the yellow in splotches here, right? So let's see what that looks like now. So you should be able to see more noise in some places, less noise in others. So you can see more noise up here, a little less noise right here, a little less noise right here. And that actually looks like a nice balloon because it's only pulling from some spots harder than the others. Some of that tension's a little bit different. So we can erase a little bit more and smooth. But you kind of get the point. You can play around with this forever. Be Bob Ross for a day. Painting vertex maps happily. And there you go. You got full control over that. So that's the texture, right? That's how you can apply a nice texture and on like a sphere, an extruded circle. But what if you wanted to do hearts and stars and all the other Lucky Charms kind of things? What if you wanted to do that? Well, that's fairly easy. Let's just render this one more time. I dig it. I like it. I'm digging it. Cool. So what if you wanted to make other shapes? Well, there's some things to kind of keep in mind when creating little shapes. So here are some hearts, and I want to highlight. Let's go into our views here. I want to highlight how I made these splines here. So this rounded circle here on the left, and this is specifically where I want you guys to pay attention to, is I have 2 points that make up this little crease here. And in contrast with this object over here, where it's just a single point, it's just a linear point, no rounding whatsoever, no extra points right here or right here. So you can see all the points there, and you can see all the points there. The only thing that's different is I have 2 points here instead of the 1. And I want you guys to notice what happens with that nice rounded bit here versus the sharp bit right there. So what I'm going to do, I already have these objects set up for this workflow, being that we have the grid, quadrangles, we have everything split up as they should be. We have create single object, and then we also have the subdivided guy here, and that's actually not matching, so let me go and match that really quick. So 8, and then there's 8 there, and 8 there. Cool, so both of our extrudes are good. I'm just going to make both of these editable, and I'm going to do a loop selection, apply our simulation tag cloth, seam poly is going to set that. Let's bring our Dress-O-Matic down to 3 and do that. You can see we have this really nice, looks really a lot like a heart balloon. And that's with the rounded, the more subdivisions. Now let's do that same thing to our sharp edge, the sharp edge right here. Do the same exact workflow. Go to simulation cloth, set the seams, and bring the width down to 3. Dress-O-Matic. You can see one huge difference, and that is that this little bit is super, super rounded. So basically what I did was, by creating those extra points here, instead of just using one sharp point, I used 2 sharp points. I kind of guided that seam a little bit more than a linear seam or a linear point would. So let's just demonstrate this a little bit more with, hopefully that made sense, with a star. So what I want to do is kind of go through again how having sharp points and not rounded points have everything kind of bunch up to these edges. But if you have something rounded and look more flat and fat and bloated, that actually helps us make our balloon a little bit better. So again, our sharp edges here, we have everything set up, create single object, quadrangles, and subdivided. So we're just going to make and this is all sharp edges. So I'm going to hit C to make it editable. I'm going to go UL, make my loop selection, select the seams, right click, simulation tag cloth, set the seams. Let's bring the width down to 3 for the seams and Dress-O-Matic. And you can see this looks more like a starfish than the actual star balloon. And the reason for that is because we have those sharp points. And they were very skinny. So anything that has skinnier length or skinnier width is going to get sucked in. So you need to prepare for that. And that's why I specifically prepared this this other star here. If I go into my point mode and just make this editable, you can see that I kind of plan for the kind of the suction that happens when the Dress-O-Matic does its thing. And what I want to do even further to help round this out is to select all these like inner points, and I want to just right click and do a soft interpolation here. So we have sharp points on the edges, which I actually want because I want it to bunch up on these edges right here, right? I actually want that, but I don't want this to be sucked in so much. So that's kind of why I preemptively kind of scaled everything out a little bit more, so it's more like a rounded circle than a star, because those edges got sucked in extremely too much and made it look like a starfish. So if I understand how the cloth Dress-O-Matic works and understand that these edges are going to get sucked in a little bit to try to bridge those seams, you can kind of guide the simulation and create your spline objects to kind of account for that. So I have everything looking good on my rounded sphere, or my rounded star. Make it editable. Gonna go do my loop selection, do the same thing, do simulation tags, cloth, seam polys, and bring our seam width down to 2, Dress-O-Matic, and you can see that those edges got sucked in a little bit less, actually a lot less than this one, because again we preemptively prepared for that. Now we can go back, we can undo all this stuff, and maybe we want these edges to be sucked in a little bit more. Maybe that's a little bit too much. So we can go in here and just scale this down a little bit. And let's actually just show what happens when I round out these edges too. So I'm just going to go and to actually round out edges and chamfer like you would in Illustrator, just right click. We're going to go all the way to chamfer here. And then we're just going to click and drag, and then we can actually create nice rounded edges here. So you can have this super rounded or not. So let's just see what happens when it's super rounded. Hit C, make it editable, grab those scenes, UL for loop selection, right click, cloth, set the seams, Dress-O-Matic, and you can see that the difference between those rounded chamfered edges and the sharp edges, and that actually looks pretty good. That looks like a star balloon. So again, how you set up your initial spline, kind of make it look like it's a bloated kind of thing. You can really tell in my last example here the difference between just the regular letter I with some sharp edges and this like really fat bloated I here. So what I'm going to do is just make this sharp letter I editable, loop selection. You're really going to see this kind of really get vacuum sealed up and look very distorted. I'm just going to go to cloth, set the seam polys, Dress-O-Matic, and you're just going to see it shrivel up like that. So again, with letters, with logos, with anything, you need to almost make it look like your letter is like bloated and just looks like it's about to explode. Spent a little bit too much time at the Golden Corral, eating at the buffet, And let's just make this editable. And let's see what this one looks like. UL for the loop selection. Simulation tags, cloth. Set the seam polys. Dress-O-Matic. And you can see exactly, like that was more predictable. We made this bloated letter I. And now we have this, it's way more, looks way more like a balloon than this shriveled little mess over here. So that's kind of the, let me just go ahead and for this. Again, if you want to save that, hit set initial state and then just delete that tag. So that's actually some geometry here. And yeah, so now you can texture that up just like we did with our main balloon here. So that's basically it. Create some balloons, create some fun, happy stuff. Alright, so that's how you can make a Mylar balloon inside of Cinema 4D. So we covered all of the settings for this workflow to work using an Extrude Object and some splines, how to get nice, evenly subdivided meshes that we can then use the Cloth Engine and the Dress-O-Matic function to be able to make nice little seams to create our nice little wrinkly edges along our balloon. Then we covered Vertex Maps, how we can use Vertex Maps as a mask to then apply even a little more fine-tuned wrinkles on our Mylar balloons. And then we went over a few more workflow tips for how to create different types of balloons like hearts and stars and even letters. So if you guys have any questions about anything I covered in this tutorial, please leave them in the comments sections. I'll try to get to them as fast as I can. And if you guys make any balloons using this technique, I would love to see it. Be sure to hit me up on Twitter in the comments. Love to really see what you guys are coming up with, making your own fun balloons. So if you like this tutorial, be sure to hit the like button. I'd really appreciate that. I really appreciate all of you out there watching this tutorial. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye, everybody.